respond. So, Glynne, can I ask you to kick us off with your take on just the Office for Students and its powers?
Great. Thank you very much, Neil. I'm probably one of the very few people to have read every page of this. If you want a little bit of light reading, I recommend it to you. But it gives you some idea, I guess, of the scale of change that we're looking at, because I think it's very real change that we are looking at. And I suppose the biggest change is that rather than having two separate markets between the public sector and the private sector, we're now going to have one market. And I think most people think actually that we're going to carry on with these two separate markets, but it's quite clear that actually we are moving to a single market in the HE space. And it is a free market. I think if you read lots of the documents in the consultation, you will see that actually they are setting up institutions to fail. So for the first time, actually, there's a plan around how an institution would actually work out if it were to actually fail. And that's the first time that I've ever seen, and I've been involved in education work for over 30 years, that actually institutions are required to have plans as to what would happen if they were to fail. And I suspect the OFS is looking forward to the first institution that is going to fail and has plans around how to deal with that. I'm happy to talk more about that if people would like to. We are, however, seeing an upswing in work under the current rules, because actually a lot of these new rules are going to be more difficult for institutions post the OFS coming into place than they are now. So, for example, if you're interested in applying for degree awarding powers or getting student funding, it is much easier to do that. It will be easier to do it under the current rules than it is under the new rules. So the current rules will remain in place until March of next year. So we've certainly seen 4 or 5 clients come to us seeking to do things under the current rules because they don't really like the look of what's going to happen under the new rules. So I suspect that gives you some idea of the scale of change as well. The other point I guess I'd like to make at the start is that all documentation is a consultation document. So we have until the 22nd of this month to actually make any representations that we want on it. So it's not a given that what we have got in the consultation document is what we will see. Having said that, I think if you look at the amount of work that the civil servants have clearly done to come up with this consultation document, I suspect the chance of seeing much significant change away from what is set out here is pretty slight indeed. So I think we, certainly as a firm, we think that what we are seeing in the documentation is what will come into force. But it doesn't come into force until the 1st of August of 2019. So even though the current rules will be scrapped in March of next year, we're then going to have this 18-month period when actually we're going to have to work on the new rules and you're not able to work on the old rules. So there's a gap there, and I'm very unclear as to what would happen if one wanted to apply for university title, for example, and you're not allowed to do so under the current rules and the new rules haven't come into force. So I think there is something to actually look at there as well. What we're also going to see is the huge powers that the OFS have. There's no doubt that actually as a regulator it will fall within the grouping of a super regulator. The powers it has are immense. I just now want to pick up some sort of themes that come out of the consultation document, and the first one I want to pick up on is pay and Vice-Chancellors' pay. But it's not just Vice-Chancellors, although the focus pay, of course, although the focus in the press around Bath, and Bath seems to be a hotbed of high-paid Vice-Chancellors at the moment, it's not actually, the focus isn't just on Vice-Chancellors, it's on senior managers. In fact, it's not even on senior managers, it's on the absolute amount of pay that people are paid. So you will see that if you are paid over £100,000, that has to be shown in the report and accounts of the institution. And if the figure is over £150,000, then you have, if the OFS asks you, to explain why you are paying individuals over £150,000. Now, those are obviously large amounts of money, but if you compare that to what individuals of this type will be paid in the private sector, they're not that large. And it also seems to me that there's not much talk about those figures being increased by inflation. So we may see these figures just sort of capped out because the Prime Minister's pay clearly hasn't gone up and not going up in the near term. So these figures are going to get smaller and smaller in relative terms over the next few years. One of the effects I think we will see of these pay caps is that actually those people who may want to move from the private sector to the public sector are likely to be very few. In the past, a lot of the vice-chancellors going to some of the larger institutions and the Russell Group universities, they've been trying to seek individuals from the private sector. I suspect this might put an awful lot of those people off coming into the sector. So pay is definitely one area of focus, and one that I suspect that for the private sector coming into the public sector, they're not going to be very keen as well, because I think all of the vice-chancellors of I think it's 6, the private sector HE providers at the moment, they're all paid well over £150,000. I mean, they probably have lots of senior managers paid over £100,000. So I suspect we may see people like us and law firms being asked to come up with arrangements whereby these individuals are paid a sum of money, but in a group-wide way rather than on an institutional basis. We will see some clever schemes probably about how you can pay people without actually having to show the figures in the accounts. The sort of second element is actually from the private sector point of view. Whilst you may think that they're going to be very keen on this, I suspect they're not going to be that keen, because they're going to be brought within a regulatory framework that they're not within at the moment. So, for example, they are going to have to obtain some sort of rights through the OFS, and it's unclear exactly what those rights are in order to get their Tier 4 rights, the UK VI rights as well. Now, at the moment, they don't need to actually do anything other than apply to UK VI in order to get their Tier 4 and Tier 2 rights. So you're seeking to actually introduce a regulatory element to it, which they don't have at the moment. You'll also note that the TEF is going to apply to them as well. If they want to draw down public funding, then and they have more than 500 students, then the TEF is going to have to apply to them. Many of them probably won't be very keen on that. And they also have to comply with the public interest test as well, which actually is defined as freedom of speech. But I suspect it's more than freedom of speech. I suspect having to put the public interest at the heart of what they do may be difficult for an organisation which is there to make a return to its shareholders. Also, for them, having to sort of widen the development of groups to whom they are willing to offer their services, I think could be quite difficult as well. So I don't think it's all in favour of the private sector. One of the very new elements, the third element I want to pinpoint, is the credit transfer. Credit transfer has been talked about for many years, and in the States, for example, it's a common part of the student experience, the ability to move your credits from one institution to another institution. We don't really see that in Britain, even though the rights are normally vested in the institutions, but actually at the heart of several documents is the ability for a student to vote with their feet. So we are going to see students, no doubt, being willing to move from one institution to the other. That will obviously raise some very interesting questions, because if you were to study 2 years at a lower ranked institution and then were to move for your final year to a higher ranked institution, does the degree that you get, is it a higher ranked institution, or is it from the lower ranked, or is it a mixture of the two? And that doesn't appear to have been thought through particularly here. But I think we will see students seeking to shop around a little bit through the credit transfer market, because institutions are required to have proper credit transfer rules. And that will apply whatever level of the 3 tiers that you're on the OFS lists. The fourth element I just want to pick up on is the powers of the OFS, not only as a regulator, but also with the ability to validate degrees as well. So it's going to sit on both sides of the table. And how that is going to work out is very unclear to me at all. I mean, in terms of its own validation powers and rights, I mean, who's going to oversee what it does? Or is it free to do what it wants, free of any inspection or scrutiny? and how is that going to work in a free market? Is it actually going to compete with some of the very same organisations that it's meant to be acting as a regulator towards? On the other side of it, from a charitable point of view, the OFS is going to act as the regulator for the exempt charities. Most HEIs in the UK at the moment are exempt charities, but they're talking about trying to bring broader groups of institutions into the exempt charitable status. So we may see a broadening of powers. So from a regulatory point of view, the OFS may act as a regulator for institutions that are not within scope of the Funding Council at the moment. I think that's a very interesting angle for it. The next theme, and you see that various themes here I want to pick up, is on student contracts. There is a clear reference to the fact that students do have the benefit of a contract. There's been lots of debate in the past about whether students are consumers and therefore whether they have contracts or not. But it's clear that they have to have contracts, and the OFS is going to regulate what the form of those contracts is going to look like, and in particular it makes strong reference to the need to comply with the CMA rules as well. So I think the freedom for institutions to try to specify different terms for their student contracts is probably going to be much less than it is now. The next theme I just want to pick up on is on DAPs, on degree awarding powers. This has been a big focus of the consultation document. So you will be aware that actually you will still be able to apply for degree awarding powers based on a track record, but you'll also be able to apply for what is described as new DAPs, which are those who don't have a degree award, don't have a track record which they can put forward to get degree awarding powers under the current rules. So this is the ability for Burger King or McDonald's or Microsoft to actually come into the market and actually sell a degree awarding institution. And we would probably see some of the students. The problem is that they only get these new DAPs for a 3-year time period. Well, for students who may be joining for a 3-year course in the second or third year, it doesn't really offer much hope to them, does it, that particular institution may not get its degree awarding powers rolled over at the end of that 3-year time period. On the upside, for if you compare it to the current market, where those who have been given degree awarding powers only get them for 6 years if they're in the private sector, now they will get them for an indefinite time period. So again, it will be a level playing field with all institutions. I thought there's an interesting angle on the grade inflation. Every institution is going to have some sort of KPI around grade inflation on the basis that there is no grade inflation, which actually means that from an institution point of view, you will be better by the OFS if your students continue to graduate with the same number of first, seconds and thirds year on year. So there's absolutely no incentive. In fact, there's going to be a positive disincentive for your students to get better degrees. One of the other areas of focus here is on the intervention powers for the OFS, much stronger intervention powers than the Funding Council Secretary of State has got at the moment, and a wide range of intervention powers, so the ability to fine institutions, for example, the ability to withdraw degree awarding powers in subject areas. So you don't have to withdraw all degree awarding powers, so if your law school is failing, you can withdraw, the OFS could seek to withdraw your degree awarding powers just for the law school. So I guess we will see those powers used. The OFS seem very keen to want to use the powers if you read the consultation document in full. And as to how that's going as a student, I'm entirely sure. And as part of those intervention powers, as I mentioned before, that they lead for what is described as a student protection plan, which is a plan as to what would happen if the institution were to fail. That's the first time that you'll have to have a plan of that type. You're not required at the moment to have such a plan. As to what they're going to look like, I think is an interesting question. The next theme I want to pick up on is one that Neil has seen me pick up on a number of occasions, which is that these rules apply to England only. But obviously the UK is comprised of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I don't say that just because I'm from Wales. But because we have different governments in each of those areas, as to how these rules, the English rules, are going to play out across the UK, I think is very interesting indeed. And one of the issues for the OFS is that in order to be regulated by the OFS, you need to be regarded as an English HEI, and an English HEI is one where over half of what is taught and what it teaches is in England. Well, there are probably a large number, I suspect, of the private providers that won't meet that sort of test. So whether they're going to have to set up group structures or do it a slightly different way is not entirely certain. But what is certain is that actually it's now open to the Welsh, Scottish and Northern Irish governments to actually come up with different rules. So if they wanted, as it were, to try and fish in the English pond and attract institutions that might otherwise set up in England to actually set up in Scotland, Northern Ireland, now is the time to do it. Because from a degree awarding powers point of view, a really important point is that the degree awarding powers are UK-wide. There is no such thing as English degree awarding powers. So no English employer could turn around and actually say, well, because you've got a degree from a Welsh university, we're not going to recognise that. That will be a breach of British law to do that. There's another set of consultations coming out. So the 540 pages is not the entire breadth of what we're going to see. There's a consultation, for example, on the shorter degree programmes. There's an awful lot of focus on that, the 2-year programmes, 18-month programmes, whatever it is, and whether there could be blended learning programmes, online programmes, or as some of the American institutions have, where it's partly online and partly campus based, which we haven't yet seen in Britain, but may see fairly soon. There's a big change on the student funding side. In order to draw down student funding, you will need to be registered with the OFS and registered either in the approved or approved fee cap groupings. And that could be a very major issue for some of the private providers, because at the moment they can simply apply to the Department for Education and get their each course in the same way, a certain course which it becomes eligible for student funding. So that is not going to be open to them in the same way. So that's a real change in the market place for them. And similarly, if they want to operate under university title or they want to obtain degree awarding powers, then they're going to have to be either approved or approved fee cap. So again, that's a major change to where they are at the moment, because it is possible for an institution to have degree awarding powers and university title without wishing to draw down any public funding whatsoever. That's not now going to be open to institutions to do, which I think, if you think there's a free market, is a rather odd place to be, because why shouldn't you be able to get degree awarding powers and university title and choose not to draw down on public funding? You could do that, however, if you were to set up in Wales or Scotland. The sort of last point that I want to make, which is relevant to the institutions on the research funding, is that you can only bid for research funding if you are registered at the approved fee cap level. That means that actually, from a private provider point of view, very few of them are probably going to want to dip their toes into the research funding pot. So Neil, those were the sort of themes that I picked up on. I'm happy to take any questions.